After a record rise in wholesale gas prices, the government holds urgent talks with energy suppliers. Costs are climbing due to global shortages, with warnings domestic bills could go up too. Food production costs have been affected. The meat industry warns there could be supply problems. The government says energy security is an absolute priority and we're not heading for a winter crisis. Also tonight, as America admits a drone strike killed 10 Afghan civilians by mistake, relatives say the US apology isn't enough.
This was America's last act of war before it pulled out of Afghanistan, and the decision to fire the missile smacks of panic. And what a legacy.
Pop-up clinics for Freshers Week, the drive to get students COVID jabbed as university life gets back to normal.
In the air. Oh no! Oh, that's unbelievable!
And some stunning fielding helps the Kent Spitfires beat Somerset in the T20 Blast cricket final. Good evening. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, says the government doesn't expect energy supply emergencies this winter as wholesale gas prices rise sharply. He was speaking after holding urgent talks with energy companies following steep rises in costs that have already seen some businesses go bust and badly affected the food and steel industries. The fear is domestic consumers could soon see higher bills. Here's our business correspondent, Katie Austin.
Gas is a key source of the energy that heats our homes and powers our industries. Since the start of the year, wholesale prices have soared, almost doubling in the UK, prompting the government to hold urgent talks with the energy industry today. Reasons for the increase include lower wind and solar generation, high demand and reduced supply from Russia. The unprecedented costs are already taking their toll. 4 small energy suppliers have recently gone bust, with more expected to follow as soon as next week.
The conversations right now with government are about where we may or may not need additional targeted support for particular customers or users. The industrial sector is obviously a really high priority.
Steel makers, which need a lot of energy, are worried.
If they're at this price now, what's it going to be like in the winter? And if it carried on like this, then I'm really fearful of not just the steel sector, but all energy intensive sectors and then downstream operations, because that's what we do. We're at the start of that supply chain. We sell to manufacturers.
High energy prices have already forced 2 large UK fertiliser plants in the north of England to close. One consequence is a shortage of their crucial byproduct carbon dioxide, and that could hit food and drink businesses, because it's used to stun some animals before slaughtering and for meat packing. Meat processors fear the shortage could hit production.
It's used to extend shelf life through packaging, not just in meat, but on all foods. And at a time when we're struggling because of the haulage shortages in this country to keep the supply chain running, to actually lose shelf life and have a shorter shelf life on the products going onto shelves, this is going to cause even more disruption. So this is a really serious problem for us.
The owner of one large poultry group, which includes Bernard Matthews, called the carbon dioxide problem a massive body blow. And the online food delivery company Ocado says it now has limited stock of some frozen foods because it can't get enough dry ice. The trade body representing major supermarkets said the disruption couldn't have come at a worse time, with the lorry driver shortage already causing issues. The rising price of gas is mainly being felt by businesses at the moment, but it is likely to feed through into higher bills for consumers at a time when the cost of living is already rising. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, says Britain can meet demand for gas and the government doesn't expect supply emergencies this winter. But some things are beyond their control. With wholesale prices, there are global factors at play. Katie Austin, BBC News.
Our political correspondent Nick Eardley is here. The Business Secretary held talks today. There are more tomorrow and going into next week. I mean, that's a sign of how serious this really is.
I think that's right, Clive. We've heard some in the energy sector call this a crisis today, and although that's not a phrase that the government's using, ministers are taking it seriously. the message from the business secretary after those talks tonight was that he doesn't think that supply is a cause for immediate concern. He's not anticipating big crises this winter, but the government is having to grapple with the very real possibility that the price of wholesale gas stays extremely high and the potential significant ramifications that has as the knock-on effect of that. Now, Labour argue the government hasn't done enough to prepare for this, that the country's been left vulnerable, and they're warning about a cost of living crisis. Remember, it's not just energy prices. There's inflation, there's the end of the universal credit uplift, there's some other supply chain issues that we've talked about over the last few weeks linked to COVID and to Brexit as well. The government says this rise in gas prices is worldwide. It's not something it controls. It argues that the energy price cap will help many households escape the worst impact of this. But there are going to be more talks in the next couple of days. Ministers are trying to work out how long this high cost could remain and the potential knock-on impact that could have.
Sure. OK. Nick, many thanks. Nick Early there. The French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian says there have been lies and duplicities surrounding the new Pacific Security Pact signed by America, the UK and Australia without consulting France. President Macron has taken the unprecedented step of recalling his ambassadors to Washington and Canberra in the growing row between the NATO allies. From Paris, here's Hugh Schofield.
For the Americans, the Australians and the British, it's a new alliance to ensure stability in the Pacific and thwart the strategic ambitions of China. But Australia's decision to buy nuclear submarines from the US has left the French feeling stunned and humiliated. Their contract with Australia has been simply binned. Ordered back home by President Macron, the French ambassador to Canberra was as polite as he could be about the reasons for France's anger.
I think this has been a huge mistake, a very, very bad handling of a partnership, because it was not a contract, it was a partnership.
This evening, the Foreign Minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian, spoke again on national television.
There has been lying, duplicity, a major breach of trust and contempt. This will not do. Things are not going well between us. It means there is a crisis.
I'm with the President of France. That makes me feel better.
Just a few months ago, it was all smiles at the G7 summit in Cornwall between Presidents Biden and Macron, and all talk of cooperation and shared challenges. But behind the scenes, the French are convinced that the three English-speaking nations were hatching the plan to cut them out. The fallout is potentially very great.
This puts a big rift down the middle of the NATO alliance, pushes France towards doing more with other European countries, puts Britain very much in the camp of the Americans in dealing with the Indo-Pacific. But Britain needs a functioning NATO alliance. And my worry is that this does deep damage to NATO, going well beyond the diplomatic row over an arms deal.
As they assess the damage, the French are asking themselves tough questions. Who now can be relied on as a serious military ally?
Noticeably, here at the French Foreign Ministry, the one ambassador who's not being recalled is the one to London. One reason being put about is that the French regard the British role in the new pact as being that of a junior partner. But it does also suggest a willingness to keep lines of communication open.
The souring of relations is in stark contrast to when President Macron visited an Australian submarine in 2018. With an election coming early next year, he has perhaps to act tough. But his angry reaction has broad support. For most people, it's not the government that's been humiliated, but France. Hugh Schofield, BBC News, Paris.
Here, let's take a look at the latest coronavirus figures, and there were 30,144 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That means in the last week, there was an average of 29,561 new cases per day. 8,068 people were in hospital across the UK, according to the latest figures, with 164 deaths. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. The average number of deaths per day in the last week is now 143. 89.3% of people aged 16 or over have had their first jab, while 81.6% have been double vaccinated. Travel companies have seen a surge in holiday bookings after the announcement that COVID rules in England are being relaxed for people going abroad. In future, countries will be ranked simply as low or high risk instead of red, amber and green. Those who are fully vaccinated will no longer need to take a COVID test before returning from a low-risk area. Now, dozens of universities have set up pop-up clinics and walk-in centres for students to receive COVID vaccines. As the new academic year begins, students who are not yet vaccinated are being urged to get jabs during Freshers' Week. Megan Patterson has more details.
Have you registered with a GP?
A new addition to the usual Freshers' Week festivities at Oxford Brookes University.
Make sure we've got 0.3.
Pop-up clinics and grab-a-jab drop-ins all aimed at encouraging as many students as possible to get vaccinated amid some concern about COVID spread in young people.
We are aware just before the summer there was quite a high increase in COVID infection rates amongst the 18 to 24-year-olds, so we're really keen to try and sort of capture them just as they're coming back to university to make sure in the environment they live in, maybe in shared houses, that we minimise the spread and the transmission of COVID as much as possible. Obviously we want people to really enjoy their university terms and so it's to really make it possible for them to do that.
In England, 72% of young people aged between 18 and 24 have already had their first jab. Among them is Holly, now waiting for her second. It's as much about her own freedom as protecting others.
Socialising with other people, I would like to be vaccinated and eventually I'd like to be able to go on holiday. I'm worried about family members getting it as well because they've got to go to work and all of those things. So financially they need to be able to go off to work, so it's important for me to get it as well.
Thank you for coming.
With so much disruption to college and university terms last year, it's hoped increased vaccination will keep students well and return face-to-face teaching as the norm.
We do want to have students back on campus, but we want them to feel safe. We want everyone in the university community to feel safe. I think the first thing that we're really focusing on with all students is do take the opportunity to get vaccinated. We know that vaccinations are the best protection that individuals can take. It's the best protection for the university community as a whole.
Many universities will still ask students to wear masks and will manage timetables to avoid overcrowding. NHS teams hopeful that, coupled with increased vaccination, will not only maximise student enjoyment, but also reduce pressure on services as we approach the winter months. Megan Patterson, BBC News.
Relatives of the family of 10 Afghan civilians killed in an American drone strike in Afghanistan last month say the attack amounted to a war crime. US officials have admitted the airstrike, which killed 7 children in Kabul, was a mistake. From there, Jeremy Bowen reports.
This is all that remains of the Toyota Corolla that the Americans tracked for hours as they convinced themselves entirely incorrectly that it was packed with explosives. 5 of the 7 dead children were playing in the car when it was hit. Its owner, Zamari Ahmadi, who they believed wrongly was an Islamic State bomber, had just driven it home from his work with an American aid organization. The survivors have moved out. After their terrible loss, they want compensation and resettlement in a safe country.
Yeah, today I want my message for USA and all people around the world that they are the USA make a big mistake in here and lost 10 members of our family. That I want to justice, and before also we say that we are innocent people.
This was America's last act of war before it pulled out of Afghanistan, and the decision to fire the missile smacks of panic. And what a legacy. It isn't necessarily the parting shot of the Americans because they still have the capacity to hit targets from the air.
The US relies increasingly on drones. Across the road, the neighbours are still traumatised by what they heard and saw. Parisa said there was an explosion. I picked up brain and human flesh from the ground. America's latest deadly blunder shows how dangerous its drone strategy can be for civilians. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Kabul.
In the last few minutes, the Kent Spitfires have been crowned cricket's T20 Blast champions. They beat Sussex in the semi-finals before going on to defeat Somerset in the final. Adam Wilde has been watching a dramatic day's play at Edgbaston.
This was cricket's longest day. 4 teams, 3 matches, 2 finalists. Now to find one winner. A countdown that had begun in the morning. Somerset pulling off a semi-final victory as spectacular as at times it seemed unlikely. That was before Kent bludgeoned their way through the afternoon to join them. The evening showpiece then, a test of stamina in the stands as well as out in the middle. Kent the first to take aim, the bat of Daniel Bell Drummond getting things moving. The fall of wickets, though, in quick succession, stalling that progress at least for a moment. A big finish, that's what Kent needed. That is precisely what Jordan Cox provided, passing 50 with another magnificent stroke. 168 the target set for Somerset. So how would they respond? Well, Will Smead was going for it. The crowd really enjoying it. No one, it seems, more than him. If that catch was impressive, just watch this. Cox on the boundary, somehow keeping the ball in play and back to a teammate.
Oh, that's unbelievable!
Kent, brilliant. Even a final 6 couldn't get Somerset close enough. Cricket's longest day belongs to Kent. Adam Wilde, BBC News.
That's it from me and the team. Have a very good night.